Ah, my dear, there are nights that leave a mark on your soul, nights that change everything in the blink of an eye. One evening like that comes to mind, just a few Novembers ago, during my son's dinner party. Daniel looked me straight in the eye, that mischievous boy I raised, and said, with a crooked grin that I knew all too well, "So tell me, Mom, how does it feel to be completely useless now?" I remember the laughter in the room faltering, freezing in the air like frost on a window pane. My hand trembled ever so slightly as I held my fork, but I kept my voice calm. I smiled, the kind of smile only a mother can carry after years of patience, and said, "It feels like never having to worry about your bills again." For a heartbeat, the room went silent, thick, heavy silence, like smoke curling in the corners. Daniel's face went pale. And Claire, bless her, nearly dropped her glass of wine. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but failing. I just smiled. Oh, I just smiled. Because after years of swallowing my pride, of keeping quiet while my heart quietly ached, it felt wonderful to finally let the truth show itself, even just a little. But to understand why I could say such a thing, you need to know how it all began. I'm Margaret Hayes, 60 years old at the time, retired schoolteacher, widow for nearly 13 years. My late husband left me with Daniel when he was only 8, and from that moment on, he was my world. My days, my dreams, my laughter, they all revolved around that boy. I taught many children in my career, but Daniel, he was my favorite. My hardest work, my proudest effort. 6 years before that dinner, Daniel met Claire. She was elegant, refined, from the kind of family that always seemed to have silver spoons instead of steel ones like us. At first, I was delighted. Daniel was in his early 30s, successful in his engineering career, and I thought, finally, my boy has found someone to share his life with. But the first time I met Claire at dinner, I noticed the little things. The way she looked around my modest home, at the faded curtains, the old photographs, the simple china I'd inherited from my own mother. She smiled politely, yes, but her eyes, oh, her eyes said things her lips didn't. And Daniel, well, he smiled nervously and changed the topic every time her gaze pierced a corner of my world. That should have been my first warning, of course. A few weeks before their wedding, Daniel came over for our usual Sunday tea on the porch. That same porch where he'd sit as a little boy and tell me about his day, about the birds, about the adventures he imagined. But this time, his face was hesitant, the way I'd seen many times before, the look of a boy about to ask for something he feared asking. "Mom," he said, avoiding my gaze, "Claire and I found a perfect apartment in Riverside District. It's close to her office, has a balcony overlooking the park." But I already knew the but. Mothers have a way of knowing. "How much is it?" I asked gently. 3,000 a month, he said quickly, as if the words burned his tongue. I nearly dropped my teacup. 3,000? Daniel, that's more than my entire monthly pension. I know, Mom, but I can handle most of it. I just need your help with a small part, maybe a year, just until things settle. His eyes pleaded, and oh, my heart knew no boundaries for that boy. And Claire? Does she know you're asking me? His eyes darted away. Please, Mom. She can't know. She'd think I failed her. I told her I could manage everything myself. And so began my long silence. I said yes. Against my better judgment, of course, because a mother's heart is foolishly generous. Every month, I sent him $1,000 for my pension, money meant for house repairs, medicine, little emergencies. He promised it would only be a year. But 1 year turned into 2, then 3, and eventually 6. I sacrificed small joys quietly, dinners with friends, tiny vacations, a new dress here or there, all set aside so Daniel and Claire could live in comfort. And through it all, they never knew the depth of my giving. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you lost sight of your own limits? Oh, my dear, it's a lesson I learned the hard way. But maybe, just maybe, sharing it now will remind someone else they are not alone. Ah, my dear, the first months after Daniel's wedding felt like holding my breath for far too long. Every time I sent that quiet little transfer, I whispered to myself, just one more, Margaret. It's only temporary. But you see, temporary has a way of settling in, like dust that slips into the corners and refuses to leave. 1 month blurred into the next, and it became a hidden rhythm, a quiet, almost sacred habit of giving. Daniel called less and less. And when he did, his voice always seemed hurried, full of laughter or clinking glasses in the background. Claire's world, her lunches, her rooftop dinners, weekend getaways, seemed to sweep him away. I was proud, truly I was. But sometimes, when I caught my own reflection in the window, I'd whisper softly, when did I become a ghost in my own son's life? I remember that first Mother's Day after the wedding. I cooked my special stew, the one Daniel had loved since he was a little boy. I set the table with my best lace cloth and the china my mother once cherished. Daniel had promised to be here by 2. By 5 o'clock, the stew had grown cold, and with it, my heart seemed to cool as well. The phone rang. "Mom, I'm so sorry," Daniel said quickly. "Claire's family surprised us with brunch. We couldn't say no." I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "That's all right, dear. Enjoy yourself." After I hung up, I sat alone at the table. The clock ticked louder than ever. I thought of all the nights I stayed awake helping him study, the mornings I skipped breakfast so he could eat a little more. Love, my dear, can be the heaviest thing to carry. The next day, he arrived with flowers and guilt in his eyes. "Forgive me, Mom. You know how Claire's family is." Of course, I forgave him, mothers always do. But something fragile inside me cracked that day, a tiny fracture I couldn't ignore. Still, the payments continued. Every first of the month, without fail, I transferred that $1,000. I called it love, but deep down, it was fear. Fear of losing him. Fear of being forgotten. Fear that saying no might make him vanish from my life completely. Then one afternoon, my knees began to ache after years of teaching and gardening. The doctor recommended therapy, but the insurance wouldn't cover it all. I did the math and realized the treatment cost the same as my monthly help to Daniel. I laughed softly in the clinic lobby, a sad kind of laugh, and said to myself, "Guess I'll manage without it." I told myself I was fine. But each step up the stairs reminded me of what love had cost me. Weeks later, my friend Ellen invited me on a short cruise for retired teachers. "You deserve a little sea breeze, Maggie," she said. "When was the last time you did something just for you?" I opened my mouth to say yes, and then I remembered the transfer date approaching. "Maybe next year," I said instead. Ellen frowned. You've been saying that for 5 years. That night, sitting under the porch light, I realized she was right. I wasn't living anymore. I was just funding someone else's life. Still, I kept quiet. Silence is easier than confrontation, my dear. Until one morning, a small envelope arrived in my mailbox, a notice from the pension office. My savings were nearly gone. I stared at it for a long time. Then, with trembling hands, I folded it neatly and tucked it behind a framed photo of Daniel as a boy, smiling, missing a front tooth, holding a paper rocket we had built together. He used to say, "One day, Mom, I'll take you to the stars." Some promises, I suppose, lose gravity over time. That evening, my phone buzzed. It was Daniel. "Mom, could you send the payment a few days early this month?" Something came up. I wanted to ask what came up, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I whispered, "All right, sweetheart," and pressed transfer once more. The next morning, while watering the flowers, I overheard my neighbor on the phone. "No, honey, you can't keep borrowing money forever. One day a parent has to say enough. Enough." The word hit me harder than the morning sun. When was the last time I had said that? As if on cue, another message lit up my screen, a social media post from Claire. There she was, beaming beside Daniel in front of a shiny new car. The caption read, "Feeling blessed. Hard work pays off." For a moment, the ground beneath me felt unsteady. Hard work, indeed. I stood there, phone in hand, heart sinking, until a thought crept in that I had never dared to think before. What if they don't need me at all? What if I've just been too blind to see it? And just as that realization began to take shape, the doorbell rang. Ah, my dear, the doorbell rang that afternoon like a question I wasn't quite ready to answer. It had been so long since anyone had come to see me unannounced. I wiped my hands on the kitchen towel and went to open the door. There he stood, a young man, holding a clipboard and an envelope. His winter coat still carried droplets of rain. "Mrs. Hayes? Delivery for you," he said politely. I nodded, signed, and closed the door, my mind already curious. The envelope was thick, the paper heavy and smooth under my fingers. Inside, a formal letter from a law firm downtown awaited me. "Dear Mrs. Margaret Hayes, we regret to inform you that your late husband's former company has located outstanding stock compensation owed to his estate. Kindly contact our office to arrange payment." For a moment, the room seemed to blur. All those years of careful counting, of making do with less than I deserved, flashed before me, and now, just like that, a long-forgotten piece of my husband's life had returned to me. I pressed the envelope to my chest. Perhaps, at last, fate had remembered me. The following week, I made my way to the law office. They confirmed the amount, modest, yes, but enough to lift a lifetime of quiet worry. After signing the papers, I wandered along the river for a long while. The wind was sharp, nipping at my cheeks, but inside, my heart felt lighter than it had in years. That night, I didn't call Daniel. I simply sat by the window, watching the city lights blink like little promises. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself a thought I hadn't dared in years. Maybe I'll use this for me. But the next morning, the phone rang again. "Mom," Daniel said, his voice nervous, almost hesitant. "Something's come up." Claire and I are thinking about moving, bigger apartment, better neighborhood. We're short on the down payment. Do you think you could? I closed my eyes. Part of me wanted to answer yes, out of habit, out of the love that never quits. But another part, the small, tired part that still remembered that envelope, whispered softly, "Not this time." "I'll see what I can do," I said carefully. He thanked me before hanging up, and the moment the call ended, a strange pair of feelings chased each other through my chest, guilt and relief. 2 days later, Claire herself arrived, for the first time in nearly a year. Designer boots, perfectly coiffed hair, carrying a box of pastries. "Oh, Mrs. Hayes, I just thought we'd stop by. Daniel told me you've been doing fine," she said, her smile sweet but thin, like icing on a delicate cake. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Daniel once drew crayon hearts for me on Mother's Day. She spoke about investments, renovations, future plans, words spinning around me like smoke. And then she dropped it casually. "Daniel said you might have some funds coming your way. Isn't that wonderful?" My heartbeat slowed. So he had told her. I kept my smile gentle, grandmotherly, unshakable. "Yes, it's a small settlement. Nothing big." She leaned forward slightly. "Well, moving into Maple Heights would really help Daniel's career. Being close to the right people matters. I'm sure he'd love your support." I sipped my tea, letting the silence stretch long enough to make her a little uncomfortable. Then I said softly, almost like a confession to myself, "Claire, when I was younger, I used to believe money built families. Now I know, it only tests them." Her smile faltered. For the first time, she looked uncertain, maybe even human. When she left, I stood at the doorway, watching her expensive car disappear down the street. The sunset burned orange across the sky, and I whispered to no one in particular, "Maybe the Real test begins now." That night, I took out a notebook and began writing a letter, not to Daniel, not to Claire, but to myself. I wrote about the years I'd given, the quiet love I'd hidden behind sacrifice, and the secret I was finally ready to reveal when the time was right. Each word felt like a stitch, closing a wound that had been open far too long. When I placed the letter in my desk drawer, I smiled. The story wasn't over, my dear. Not by a long shot. It was just getting interesting. Have you ever reached a point where enough finally meant freedom? Share your moment in the comments. Your story might give someone else the courage to take their first step. My dear, 2 weeks after Claire's visit, the phone rang again. It was Daniel. "Mom," he said, his voice careful, almost hesitant, "we're hosting a small dinner for a few friends. Claire really wants you to come. It's been too long." I paused for a moment. Every invitation before had carried a quiet, hidden request, a shadow beneath the pleasantries. But this time, something in his voice was softer, more sincere. "Of course, dear," I said, letting a gentle smile settle on my face. "Tell me when to arrive." That Saturday evening, I pulled my best dress from the wardrobe, the navy one Daniel had once said made me look like the sky before a storm. I studied myself in the mirror. Yes, more silver in my hair than I remembered, but the eyes looking back still held that stubborn little spark, the one that had carried me through a lifetime of giving. When I arrived, the apartment glittered with polished glass and designer furniture. Claire greeted me with her practiced, sweet smile. Oh, Mrs. Hayes. You look wonderful. Thank you, dear. The place is lovely, I replied, though the scent of new paint and candle wax made the air heavy, almost too perfect. The guests were mostly Claire's colleagues, confident, well-dressed, talking about markets and travel plans. Daniel moved around, refilling glasses, his laugh a little too loud, trying perhaps to fill the air with his success. I sat quietly, listening, smiling when it felt right, as one does when one has learned patience over many years. Halfway through the meal, one of the guests raised a toast. To success, to ambition, and to everyone who helped us get here. Glasses clinked. Claire turned to Daniel teasingly. You certainly got your ambition from your mother. The table chuckled politely. Daniel smirked. Well, Mom's retired now. She just gets to relax while the rest of us work ourselves to death. Another round of laughter. But then he added, almost under his breath, though loud enough for everyone to hear. Must be nice being useless for a change, huh, Mom? Ah, my dear, the old ache rose in my chest, the one made of years of quiet giving, of love that was both joy and burden. But I kept my smile, calm and steady. Useless? I said softly. That's an interesting word. I used to think the same about seeds, until I learned they only bloom after being buried. A few guests exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to laugh or stay silent. Daniel blinked, caught off guard by the quiet strength in my voice. Claire cleared her throat. She's just joking, everyone. But I wasn't. I turned back to my plate, letting the conversation drift to safer topics. Yet I noticed something new in Daniel's eyes, a flicker of unease, the kind that comes when a man begins to realize the ground beneath him isn't quite as solid as he thought. When the evening ended, I gathered my purse. Daniel walked me to the door, his voice softened by guilt before he could speak. Mom, I touched his arm gently. It's all right, sweetheart. Words reveal more about where we are than who we are. Then I smiled and left before he could answer. Back home, I opened the drawer and took out the letter I had written to myself, the one holding truths I had not yet shared. Next to it, I placed a new envelope, the copy of the inheritance notice. If Daniel thought I was useless, perhaps it was finally time to show him how wrong he had been. The next family dinner, my dear, would not be one they'd forget. Have you ever kept quiet until the perfect moment proved your worth? Tell your story in the comments. Someone out there might need your strength tonight. Ah, my dear, a week later the phone rang again. It was Daniel, and his voice was careful, almost rehearsed, as if he had practiced each word. Mom, he said, Claire wants to have another family dinner. Just us this time. I paused for a moment, then let a soft smile spread across my face as I held the receiver. Of course, dear. I'd love that. After I hung up, I glanced toward the small wooden drawer by my desk, the one holding 2 envelopes, the inheritance papers and the letter I had written to myself. Something inside whispered, it's time. That Sunday evening, I arrived at their apartment carrying a small casserole dish. Daniel's favorite, baked chicken with rosemary and garlic, the recipe my late husband had loved so dearly. Claire opened the door, her polite smile not quite reaching her eyes. Mrs. Hayes. Come in. Daniel's just setting the table. The table was arranged beautifully, candles flickering softly, fine plates gleaming, a faint scent of wine hanging in the air. It was almost too perfect. Dinner began with small talk, work, the weather, neighborhood chatter. But beneath it all, a quiet tension hummed, waiting to be acknowledged. Finally, Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom, I wanted to talk to you about something important." I set down my fork and met his eyes. "Yes, dear?" He hesitated, glanced at Claire, then continued. "We've been thinking of investing in a small property. It's a good opportunity. Claire found it, and the bank just needs a little extra security deposit." Ah, there it was, the real reason. I stayed quiet a moment, letting the silence thicken. "How much?" I asked softly. "About 20,000, he said quickly. "It's not much, but it would really help us get started. We'll pay you back soon." Claire nodded eagerly. "It's practically risk-free." I smiled faintly. "You've always been ambitious, Daniel. I admire that. But tell me, do you think I'm capable of that kind of help?" Daniel blinked, uncertain. "Well, you've always been good with savings, Mom." "You retired? Alone?" I finished for him. "Useless?" The color drained from his face. "Mom, I didn't mean." I raised my hand gently. "It's all right, sweetheart. But you see, there's something you don't know." I reached into my purse and placed an envelope on the table. Daniel stared at it, confusion etched across his face. "What's this?" he asked. "Your father's final gift," I said quietly. "A company settlement recently rediscovered. It belongs to his estate, and therefore, to me." Claire's eyes widened. "Oh my God. Margaret, that's incredible." I nodded slowly. "Yes. But it also means that for years, while I was sending you money and skipping meals, this was sitting unclaimed. Life has a way of waiting until we've learned the hardest lessons before giving back what was always ours." Daniel looked down, ashamed. "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted to see what kind of man you'd become without it," I said softly. And tonight, I got my answer. The table fell silent, the only sound the faint crackle of candle flames. For once, Daniel couldn't meet my eyes. And Claire, usually so composed, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. I stood, taking my purse. "I don't need to invest in your dream," I said gently. "I already invested in you." I leaned forward, kissed Daniel's forehead, and whispered softly, "Spend wisely, my son. Your words cost more than you think." Then I walked out, leaving the envelope on the table. But not the one they expected. Inside was only my letter, a few pages of truth, not a single dollar. Have you ever walked away from something that no longer respected your love? Share your story in the comments. It might remind someone else of their worth. The house felt unusually quiet after I left that night. The kind of quiet that makes you notice the ticking of the wall clock and the small, empty spaces where laughter once lived. That same silence followed Daniel long after he and Claire cleared the dishes, moving almost automatically, wordlessly. Only the faint tick kept time with his heartbeat. Finally, curiosity won. He reached for the envelope I had left on the table and tore it open, expecting bank papers, a check, perhaps even some document about the settlement. Instead, folded pages fell out, my handwriting neat and looping, each letter deliberate, carrying more weight than any money ever could. He read aloud, softly at first, then with growing awareness. My dear Daniel, I once thought love meant giving until it hurt. I gave because I believed you'd see it and remember. But the more I gave, the smaller I became in my own life. This letter isn't about money. It's about the debt no parent should owe, the debt of being needed only for what they provide. If you're reading this, it means I've finally chosen myself. I will always love you, but I will no longer carry what you refuse to see. Mom. Daniel's throat tightened. He sank into a chair, the paper trembling in his hands. Behind him, Claire stood with her arms crossed, unsure whether to comfort him or defend herself. She's exaggerating, Claire murmured, though her voice held less certainty than usual. Daniel shook his head slowly. No, she's right. I haven't visited her without asking for something in years. He looked again at the letter. There, at the bottom, a second note, smaller, almost like a whisper. If you ever wonder what I did with the real settlement money, don't. I already used it for something priceless. He turned the page, but that was all there was. What does that mean? Claire asked, a faint tremor in her voice. Daniel stared out the window, memories washing over him, the old house with its creaking porch, the rows of flowers that never seemed to die no matter how little water they received. And then, slowly, he understood. Perhaps she had spent that money on herself, therapy, a small trip, a repaired roof, or maybe on something no one could see, her peace. For the first time in his adult life, Daniel didn't know whether to chase after her or simply sit still and let the lesson settle into his heart. A week later, he did drive out to the old neighborhood. The front garden bloomed brighter than he remembered, and a small for sale sign leaned gently in the yard. Inside the gate, a neighbor waved. She said she was moving somewhere near the coast, the woman said. Said she wanted to watch sunsets instead of schedules. Daniel smiled faintly, feeling both the ache and the relief in his chest. His mother hadn't vanished, she had simply gone where she could breathe again, where her heart could bloom without counting pennies or bending herself to please others. Ah, my dear, sometimes silence is the strongest answer a person can give. And sometimes, the greatest gift a mother can leave is the quiet lesson that love, given without bounds, is worth more when it includes herself. Have you ever realized someone's silence was their strongest answer? Share your thoughts below, your words might reach someone who needs to hear them. It's passed before Daniel finally gathered the courage to find her. He'd tried calling a few times, but the number she once used had been disconnected. Claire had stopped mentioning her altogether, choosing silence over discomfort. The apartment felt colder now, filled with nice furniture and no warmth. One morning, Daniel took the day off work. He packed a small overnight bag, printed directions to a quiet coastal town 2 hours away, and drove off without telling anyone. The highway wound between golden fields, and the air smelled of salt long before he saw the ocean. He followed the address listed in the settlement letter, hoping it would lead him to her. When he arrived, he found a small white cottage perched on a hill overlooking the sea. A wooden wind chime danced softly in the breeze. For a moment, he was afraid to knock. Then the door opened, and there she was. "Mom," he breathed. Margaret smiled gently, as though she had been expecting him all along. "Daniel, you took your time." He looked older than she remembered, tired, humbled, yet finally seeing her clearly. I read your letter 100 times, he said. And I realized you were right. I've been measuring love with numbers. She motioned for him to come inside. The house was small but bright, filled with books, plants, and the sound of waves through the open window. On the table sat a half-finished painting, a landscape of the very ocean before them. I didn't know you painted, he said quietly. I didn't either, she replied, smiling. Some things you only discover once you stop carrying other people's burdens. They stood by the window for a long while, the silence between them no longer sharp but healing. Finally, Daniel spoke. I came to ask for forgiveness, and to give something back. He pulled a small envelope from his coat, a bank receipt showing he'd repaid every transfer she'd ever sent. She looked at it, then shook her head with a gentle laugh. Oh, Daniel. Money was never what you owed me. He frowned. Then what do you want? She placed a hand over his heart. Just this, for you to remember that kindness isn't weakness, and gratitude isn't shame. Learn that, and you'll have paid me back in full. Tears welled in his eyes. I promise, Mom. I won't forget again. She hugged him, and for the first time in years, it felt like coming home. That evening, they sat on the porch watching the sun melt into the horizon. Daniel noticed a small easel beside the door, the painting now finished. It showed two figures standing together by the sea, one older, one younger, both looking toward the light. On the back, she'd written a single line. Some endings are just second chances in disguise. He smiled. I'd like to buy this one, he joked softly. Margaret laughed. You already own half of it. They stayed there until the sky turned violet and the first stars appeared, a mother and son who had finally learned the quiet art of seeing each other. What did this story teach you about forgiveness or self-worth? Share your thoughts below. Your words might help someone find peace tonight.